He's the serial killer who went on TV's The Dating Game in the middle of his killing spree. Now 2020 has spoken with his first victim, who was only 8 years old when she managed to escape.
Some TV moments don't stand out when they first air. Whether it's a casual interview, a game show appearance, or a brief live segment that feels completely ordinary at the time. But as time passes, those same clips take on a darker meaning when the people in them are later linked to crimes, investigations, or hidden pasts that were never visible on screen. These are 6 real moments where live TV unknowingly captured something far more disturbing than anyone realized. Case 1. Ryan Jenkins. In 2009, a new reality dating series called Megan Wants a Millionaire hit television with a group of wealthy bachelors competing for one woman. Among the contestants was a Canadian real estate developer named Ryan Jenkins, and from the moment he stepped into the frame, he drew attention. It wasn't because of anything erratic, but because he had an uncanny confidence. He joked with ease, fully adopted the charming millionaire persona, and quickly emerged as one of the standout personalities in the cast. Nothing in his on-screen behavior hinted at anything darker. But what viewers couldn't see was what was happening once the camera stopped rolling. After filming wrapped, Jenkins traveled to Las Vegas and met a model named Jasmine Fiore. Within only a few days, the two married in a whirlwind ceremony. At first, it looked like the kind of story reality television loves to follow. But away from the glamour, warning signs were already appearing. Producers later remembered how Jenkins would call Fiore repeatedly while filming another show, behavior that at the time felt like typical reality TV drama. But the tension was real, and on August 15, 2009, only weeks after filming, Jasmine Fiore was found dead. Her body had been strangled and mutilated, placed inside a suitcase, and abandoned in a dumpster in California. The violence was so severe that identification took time. Once investigators confirmed who she was, Ryan Jenkins vanished. As details surfaced, he became the immediate prime suspect. For viewers, the shift was jarring. Clips that once seemed simple and entertaining suddenly carried an entirely new, chilling tone. A little over a week later, Jenkins was found dead inside a hotel room in Canada, having taken his own life before authorities could arrest him. But the case extended far beyond his death. VH1 pulled Megan Wants a Millionaire off the air almost instantly, canceling all unaired episodes and wiping the show from future schedules. Case 2. Edward Wayne. In 1972, an episode of To Tell the Truth aired with a simple premise. 3 contestants would all claim to be the same person, and a panel of celebrities had to figure out which one was telling the truth. That night, the identity was unusual. A man named Edward Wayne Edwards came to the show, a former criminal who claimed to have turned his life around. On stage, all 3 contestants introduced themselves with the same name. Each told a version of the same story: a troubled past, time spent in prison, and a journey toward rehabilitation. But only one of them was real. Edward didn't try to take over the conversation. When asked about his time in prison, he spoke calmly about learning skills, reflecting on his life, and eventually deciding to change. It sounded convincing, and at one point, he spoke about writing a book. Nothing about it felt forced. In fact, his calmness worked in his favor. While the other contestants occasionally stumbled or hesitated, Edward stayed composed, and it worked. When it came time to vote, the panelists were split, but many of them leaned toward him, and when the host finally asked the real Ed Edwards to stand, the result was shocking for most. He had fooled them. At the time, the moment played exactly as intended. Edwards' past was known, and he had been on the FBI's most wanted list years earlier for robberies, fraud, and other crimes. But there was no confirmed history of murder. By all appearances, he was exactly what he claimed to be, a reformed man trying to do better. So, they let him on. For years, that episode remained just another piece of television history. But starting in the late 1970s, Edwards began committing murders. In 1977, a young couple in Ohio was killed. In 1980, another couple disappeared after a wedding and was later found murdered. The pattern continued across decades, hidden behind an ordinary life. Then, in 1996, he murdered his own foster son. For years, he avoided suspicion. But in 2009, everything finally caught up to him. Edwards confessed to multiple murders, linking himself to long unsolved cases. That old episode from 1972 now feels different entirely. Case 3. John Cooper. In May of 1989, an episode of Bullseye aired that looked exactly like all the others. Contestants tossed darts, traded jokes with the host Jim Bowen, and fielded trivia questions while the audience cheered along. Sitting among them was a soft-spoken man from Wales named John Cooper, a contestant who blended into the mix without drawing the slightest bit of attention. But no one in that studio knew what he was about to do once he walked back into his everyday life. Because only weeks after that episode aired, Cooper committed one of the most brutal double murders in modern British history. In June of 1989, a couple was attacked along a quiet stretch of coastline. Both were shot at close range with a shotgun, and one of them, Gwenda, was also assaulted before their bodies were left where they fell. And it wasn't even the beginning. 4 years earlier, in 1985, siblings Richard Thomas and Helen Thomas had been murdered inside their home during a violent break-in. Whoever carried out the attack vanished into ordinary life without leaving a clear trail. For more than 20 years, those cases remained unsolved, with no one realizing the killer had once stood under studio lights, smiling for a game show camera. When Cooper was finally arrested and brought to trial in 2011, that old Bullseye episode was brought up again, this time as evidence. Detectives compared his face, his voice, and even the way he carried himself on the episode to witness statements and composite sketches from the original investigations. The similarities were impossible to ignore. On one side was a quiet contestant who joked politely on national television. On the other hand was a man accused of multiple killings, assaults, and a string of violent crimes stretching back decades. Cooper was eventually found guilty and handed a whole life sentence. Case 4. Stephen Port. In 2014, an episode of Celebrity MasterChef aired that looked completely normal. Former contestants returned to lend a hand. The kitchen buzzed with low conversation, and everyone worked under the host's watchful eyes. Among the helpers that season was Stephen Port, a chef who blended into the background without drawing attention. When the episode aired in June of that year, it passed by quietly. But what makes that footage unsettling today has nothing to do with what happened inside the studio. It's the reality of what Port was doing outside those walls at the same time. Because by June of that same year, while viewers were watching him cook on television, Port had already taken his first victim. His name was Anthony Walgate, a young man in his early 20s whom Port had met through a dating app. And that killing was only the beginning. Across the next 15 months, Port would murder 3 additional young men in nearly the same way. All were found within a small area near a churchyard. All were positioned in strangely similar poses. All had been given lethal doses of the same drug. And each case, at first, was labeled unexplained, not suspicious. So, while audiences watched Port plate dishes, he had already become a serial killer. And it wasn't until 2016 that he was identified. Port was then arrested, charged, and eventually convicted of all 4 murders, along with multiple assaults. Testimony revealed how he used dating apps to find victims, how he earned their trust, and how he repeated the same method again and again. And what followed made the case even darker. Investigations uncovered that police had missed several opportunities to link the deaths earlier. Despite the striking similarities, the cases weren't properly connected until after the 4th body was found and recovered. Case 5. Jonathan Schmitz. In 1995, The Jenny Jones Show taped an episode built around a segment titled Same-Sex Secret Crushes. On it, guests would walk on stage, reveal hidden romantic feelings, and the audience would react accordingly. One of the guests in that episode was Scott Amador. He had agreed to appear to reveal a secret crush on someone he personally knew, Jonathan Schmitz. Schmitz, a 24-year-old from Michigan, also agreed to participate, aware that someone would be confessing feelings toward him. Likewise, when Amador finally disclosed his crush, the reaction was immediate but not aggressive. The audience responded with surprise and noise, while Schmitz appeared visibly uncomfortable, offering an uneasy smile rather than anger. The taping ended without incident, but it was never aired as just 3 days later, everything changed. On March 9th, 1995, Amaduri was at his home in Michigan when Schmitz arrived at his door. Earlier that day, Schmitz had withdrew money from his bank account, purchased a shotgun, and drove to Amadur's residence. When Amadur answered the door, the two spoke briefly. Schmitz then returned to his car and fired twice into Amadur's chest. Amadur died at the scene, and the case quickly gained national attention. Later in court, Schmitz's defense claimed humiliation and emotional shock played a role in his actions, relying on what became known as the gay panic argument. He was ultimately sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison. Amadur's family later filed a lawsuit against the show, arguing producers should have foreseen the potential danger created by the segment. A jury initially awarded tens of millions in damages, though the ruling was later overturned. Still, the case left a lasting mark on how talk shows handled sensitive revelations. Case 6. Rodney Alcala. On September 13, 1978, the dating game filmed an episode that looked harmless at first glance, with just 3 bachelors tucked behind a wall. But this taping would later become one of the most unsettling moments in game show history, because bachelor number 1 was Rodney Alcala, a man already moving through a violent pattern long before the truth surfaced. That day, Alcala stepped onto the stage with unsettling ease, long curls, a soft-spoken voice, and that casual charm the show loved. He introduced himself as a photographer, and nobody in the room knew he had been on the FBI's most wanted list not long before. No one realized he had already been arrested for a brutal assault, or that detectives were starting to suspect he had resurfaced. Under the warm stage lights, none of that showed. The contestant that night, Cheryl Bradshaw, could only hear the bachelors, so she tossed out the usual teasing questions, and Alcala responded in a silky but strangely flat tone that didn't fit the room. The audience laughed, but even the other bachelors shifted uncomfortably at a few of his lines, something you can still catch when watching the old footage. Still, Bradshaw chose him. However, once filming stopped, her instincts took over. After only a brief conversation, she felt something cold and wrong. Years later, she said he felt creepy, like something beneath the charm didn't belong.
I imagined he seemed much taller and creepy.
She canceled the date immediately, a decision that turned out to be one of the closest escapes in television history. Because soon after, investigators connected Alcala to a trail of victims across California, including young women and even a child whose disappearance finally led authorities to him. A search of his storage locker revealed hundreds of photographs, many of unidentified people, along with evidence tying him to multiple scenes. Looking back, the episode doesn't feel like entertainment. It feels like someone stepping dangerously close to something hidden, and surviving only because she trusted a feeling she couldn't yet explain. That's it for now. See you in the next.